Now, one of the things that always flummoxes potential landlords or even landlords is when people start talking about yield calculations. So first of all, what is yield? Well, I'm going to run through some slides which hopefully will explain what yield is, but effectively it's the profitability of your property. However, depending on which method you use gives you very different answers, and you use different methods to assess how your property is performing. So what is property yield? Now, there is actually a strict definition of what property yield is. And the strict accountancy definition is the yield of an asset is the income generated by the asset over the cost of the asset. Now, don't get hung up if that doesn't mean an awful lot to you. Hopefully the next couple of slides will start to crystallise what this means. But effectively what it's saying is, it cost me so much to buy this asset and I'm receiving so much income against this asset, so therefore I compare the two and I come out with a percentage. That effectively tells me how hard the asset is working. Now for this example, I've come up with a fictional property, property A. Now property A costs £200,000. In order to buy property A, you had to put in £20,000 and raise a mortgage of £180,000. The current market value of property A is £250,000, so it's risen £50,000 since we bought it. In order to acquire, we spent £1,000 on legal fees, £7,750 on land taxes. I've assumed that this property qualifies for higher rates land taxes. It receives a monthly rent of £1,000, and the annual operating costs, including mortgage interest, is £8,000. So, moving into yield calculations. This is what I typically call the estate agent's yield proposition. What do I mean by that? Well, typically, if you're going to an estate agent and you flag to them that you are a property investor, then this is the sort of calculation they will throw at you when they talk about yield values. Effectively, what they're saying is you could achieve this much rent and the property is going to cost you this much money, as in this is no on cost, this is literally the property value they've got on listed on their sheet, and then that comes up with the yield. So if we were to apply this to property A, we end up with £1,000 monthly rent times 12, £12,000, divided by 200,000, which was the cost, and that gives me a yield of 6%. Now, I'm not a great fan of this particular calculation. It doesn't recognise the full costs associated with buying the property. So it doesn't recognise land taxes, it doesn't recognise legal fees, and if you've had to refurbish the property, it doesn't represent refurbishment costs either. And if you were going to use this under the strict accountancy rules, an asset value is the cost to bring the asset into its current place and condition. So therefore, all those costs should be included in the property cost, but they never are with an estate agent. However, what it is good is for doing a quick appraisal of the property that you're looking at against other properties you're possibly considering looking at and adding to your portfolio. The next one I think is a better proposition when you're looking at a property, and this one actually is including the accountancy definition of a property cost, which is property cost plus legal fees plus land taxes, and as I said, potentially adding in refurbishment costs, which are not in our model here. Now if we use this calculation, we end up with a smaller percentage at 5.75%, but it still gives you a good idea of what you potentially might get from this property. However, what it doesn't do is it doesn't recognise the cash generated by the property. And in general terms, with a property portfolio, the cash generated equals the profit, because you tend to run a property portfolio on a cash basis. So therefore, it doesn't represent that profit. And that's, again, another reason why I don't like this particular calculation. Now, again, another one I've seen bandied around, and I really do not like this calculation, but it is useful in one instance, and that is to try and work out whether you're rent is keeping track with a rising market. And in this particular calculation, what we do is we look at the market value of the property and we assess the rent against the market value. Now, as you can see from here, the market value of the property rose by £50,000 in my model property. And therefore, my yield has gone down from 6% to 4.8%. So if I flip back a couple of slides there, you can see the 6%, and we've now gone down to 4.8%. Now that means that I'm not tracking the market. Now sometimes you don't need to track the market, but in other times it's sometimes good to put a benchmark in. Now in this instance, maybe what I should be doing is looking to raise the rent, because it's the only other variable in this calculation I can change. And if I raise the rent, I might be able to move that percentage back up towards 6%, which is where I bought it. Now, the problem with that, of course, is that there is a ceiling for rent in the area where you've bought your property, and you might already be charging that. So you might actually have to understand that in a rising market, your yield is going to take a hit. Now, this is the calculation I would typically use when I'm assessing my property portfolio. And this is the profit yield. This is how profitable my property is against what it's cost me to buy that property. Now, when I'm talking about what it's cost me, what I'm not talking about is the purchase price. I'm talking about the physical cash I have had to put into this deal to make this deal work. So I'm talking about the deposit, I'm talking about the legal expenses, I'm talking about the land taxes, and if I had refurbished this property, the refurbishment costs. Okay, and I'm looking at that against the profit. So that's the monthly rent times 12 to annualise it, minus my annual operating costs. So for property A, that's 12,000 minus 8,000 annual costs, gives me a number of 4,000, which is my profit for the year. And the capital I had to put in to make this deal work was £20,000 deposit, £1,000 legal expenses, and £7,750 land taxes. Now, if I do that calculation, I end up with a number of 13.9%. So that's actually giving me a nominal interest rate on that cash that I've invested in this property. And as you can see, at 13.9%, that is not a bad return for this particular property model that I've put on the screen. However, I then take this one stage further and I look at the property profit after tax yield. Okay, so what I'm doing here is I'm actually putting in my potential tax liability as well. So I really am now saying this is the cash that I'm going to receive. So that's the monthly rent times 12,000 minus 8,000, which is the costs. And then what I've done is I've then done the calculation to show you the difference between a 20% taxpayer and a 40% taxpayer. So in the 20%, that's minus 800, which would be the tax on the profit, over my capital that I've put in there. And that gives me a slightly reduced yield over the previous screen of 11.1%. And if I'm a higher rate taxpayer, that gives me the tax rises from 800 to 1600 and gives me a yield of 8.3%. Now, if you look at that, you're obviously saying, well, it's gone down from 13.9 to 8.3. However, for a higher rate taxpayer, you know, the best they're going to get in an ISA is 5%, if they're lucky. Therefore, you know, at 8.3%, this actually looks like a very attractive continual investment. I'm getting 8.3%. Now, if rents were to rise, you know, possibly costs might rise to offset it, but that 8.3% could go up. So, you know, the calculations in 4 and 5 are the calculations I use when I'm assessing whether my property portfolio is actually earning me money or costing me money, or whether I should be looking at this property and saying, well, actually, I can do better with this cash in the bank, and therefore maybe what I need to do is release this property from my property portfolio and go and buy something else. So it's giving you that sort of view about how your property portfolio is doing. So in summary, from the different calculations, you can see the numbers go all over the place. And you need to choose the metrics, the yield metrics that you need to run your property portfolio. Now, some people don't care. Whereas other people, you do need to sort of look at this and make sure that you are actually achieving a better return on the property than having the money in the bank. Now, some people will turn around and say, well, actually, you're going for capital appreciation. Well, let's be honest. Okay, capital appreciation is nice, but if you have capital appreciation and your properties are not making a profit or a sufficient profit, you are going to struggle. Your cash is king. Your properties need to make a cash profit. And the bigger the cash profit they make for you, the better your portfolio will perform. Personally, I use 4 and 5, as I said when we were going through the slides. But you need to work out what method you use. Hopefully that has been of some help to you. If it has, obviously, drop some comments in the space below. The contents of the video you've just watched does not constitute advice. It's my opinion and my reading of the subject matter that I've been discussing. If you like what you heard, of course, feel free to subscribe. Somewhere, either here or here, will be a subscription button. Click the subscription button and you'll be notified when videos are posted to the channel. Somewhere here or here will also be recent videos from the channel and maybe other videos relating to this subject matter. I look forward to you subscribing and joining me on my journey and your journey as an accidental landlord.